In 1812, Napoleon's empire dominated Europe, having the largest empire since the days of Charlemagne. But it would all go crashing down due to one country, Russia. In 1812, Napoleon launches an invasion into Russia. Unfortunately for Napoleon, the invasion would end up as a complete disaster, as the Russian forces would kick out the French invaders. Following this, a new coalition would start a counterattack, which will finally defeat Napoleon, exiling him to Elba. But does all of this really has to happen? What if, instead of Napoleon invading Russia, he just didn't? Does it mean that Napoleon's empire survives a lot longer, maybe even to the 20th century? Well, you're gonna see in this video. Now, historically, Napoleon invaded Russia due to Russia leaving the continental system. To fix this, all Napoleon has to do is to destroy the continental system. Due to the continental system being a complete disaster, as all it really did was make Europe broke. And now that Napoleon has no excuse to invade Russia, he can focus on the war with Britain. In late 1812, he would create a new army with around 100,000 men and would send it across the Pyrenees. His army would capture Murcia and then Cartagena, and then the army would move north, vaporizing the pocket north of it. Following this, the French armies would invade Portugal. The British, seeing the overwhelming French numerical superiority, would retreat to the coastal fortifications. And as the British have naval superiority, they can keep supplying their forces. And now that Napoleon has no real continental threat, he can finally focus on defeating Britain. And to defeat Britain, Napoleon would use all of his resources on making a new fleet. And by 1815, it would be ready. The fleet's first objective is to capture Gibraltar. The fleet would blockade Gibraltar, and after about a month or two of the blockade, it would surrender. Following this, the fleet would blockade the rest of the British forts in Iberia, and they would shortly surrender. And with the Peninsula War being finally over, Napoleon can finally invade Britain, while Britain would send their own fleet to make a final stand against Napoleon. But this battle would never happen, as before it, Britain would surrender, recognizing French domination over the continent. And with this, the Napoleonic Wars would end, or at least for now. And this means that Europe is finally at peace. During the time of peace, Napoleon would continue the French industrialization and would reform the state, as Napoleon was a great administrator. But naturally, the peace would not last long, as Napoleon was kind of a warmonger, and luckily for him, he will get a justification for war against the Ottoman Empire. As in 1821, a revolt would start in Greece. Following this revolt, the Ottoman would start massacring the Greek population, giving Napoleon an excuse to invade. Napoleon would organize two armies to invade the Ottoman Empire. One would invade Algeria and another one would invade Greece. The size of the Algerian army would be around 50,000 men, and in about a month, France would manage to capture the entirety of Algeria, while the army that was intended to invade Greece was about 100,000 men. The invading army managed to quickly destroy the outdated Ottoman army, and after about 2 months, the French army would manage to liberate most of Greece, including Thessaloniki, while at the same time, Austria and Russia, seeing the Ottoman Empire in a vulnerable situation, would invade the Ottoman Empire. But as Napoleon advances more and more to the Balkans, a coalition of Austria, Russia, and Britain would demand Napoleon to stop his advance. So Napoleon would make peace with the Ottomans, forcing them to recognize Greece and Austrian and Russian gains. While in Greece, Napoleon would install a puppet monarch, making Greece a monarchy. But this would be Napoleon's last war, as historically, Napoleon died in 1821. Now, I gave Napoleon another year to live due to France having better medical care than St. Helena, but in late 1822, Napoleon will die, letting his son, Napoleon II, rule France. Unfortunately for Napoleon II, his early reign would be a time of crisis, as Napoleon II was only 11 years old. But, unexpectedly, the crisis would start at the Netherlands. In early 1823, a revolt would take over the Netherlands. Napoleon would organize an army of 70,000 men which would invade the Netherlands. The British, which were waiting all of this time for there to be a weakness in the French Empire, would declare war, sending an army of 50,000 men to the Netherlands. Together, the Anglo-Dutch force would manage to defeat the French invasion. Meanwhile, in Spain, a popular revolt would depose the French king of Spain, followed shortly by Portugal, while the other great powers of Russia, Prussia, and Austria would see this crisis and send an ultimatum to Napoleon. According to this ultimatum, Napoleon would agree to the repartition of Poland, the return to the Illyrian provinces, and the dismantling of the Confederation of the Rhine. And obviously, Napoleon would dismiss the ultimatum, leading to war. While to make the situation even worse, the Ottomans would invade Greece. At this point, he would be forgiven for thinking that the French Empire would collapse. But the fight was far from over, as the French organized an army of about 500,000 men. The counterattack would start with a French invasion of the Netherlands, and due to the French complete numerical superiority, they would manage to crush the Dutch rebellion. While the East, coalition forces would invade imperial territory, managing to capture the Duchy of Warsaw, Illyria, and German territory. But Napoleon would turn his army to the east, moving on the Prussians. The Prussians, seeing the huge French army, would retreat their forces to the city of Leipzig, while also calling their allies to send their armies to Saxony, and the Battle of Leipzig would start. Now, both sides can win this battle, but for the sake of the scenario, the French would win, annihilating a big part of the coalition's army. Keeping up the offensive, the French army would move north, taking Berlin and capturing most of Prussia, while also liberating the Duchy of Warsaw. Then, the French army would move south, capturing Krakow and defeating the Austrians near Prague, and with it, managing to capture the entirety of Bohemia, and finally, capturing Vienna. And after the French managed to defeat a second Russian invasion of Poland, the coalition would surrender. In the peace treaty, Poland would gain Galicia, the Danzig corridor, and France annexes Bosnia, while the Duchy of Warsaw changes its name to the Kingdom of Poland, while Prussia is forced to enter the Confederation of the Rhine, ending its time as a great power. While in the Balkans, threats of a French invasion would force the Ottomans to make peace with Napoleon, forcing the Ottomans to retreat out of Greece. While during the time of fightings, Spain would have invaded France with minimal success. But as French troops are sent from the west, they managed to repel the invasion and they would invade Spain, managing to depose the Spanish and Portuguese government. And now, Napoleon II's only opponent is Britain. But eventually, Britain is going to make peace with Napoleon. And with this, the scenario ends, leaving the French Empire stronger than it ever was. And if you like this video, give it a like and comment something. You don't know how far it helps.